Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Story Hub. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The late September sun stretched its golden rays, casting elongated shadows over the perfectly manicured lawn of the Parker household. Standing at the kitchen window, Daniel Parker sipped his coffee, watching as neighborhood kids zipped by on their bikes. The lines etched on his face and his upright stance hinted at years of disciplined service in the Marines, discipline he now applied in running his company, Parker Construction. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted something, his wife Lauren's Mercedes pulling into the driveway right at 7:30 a.m. She'd mentioned an early meeting, but her polished designer outfit and the fresh layer of makeup seemed to tell a different story. Taking another slow sip of his coffee, Daniel kept his expression neutral, mentally noting the small but noticeable changes in his wife of 8 years. "Good morning, honey," Lauren breezed through the door, her Louboutin heels making a rhythmic click against the hardwood floors. "You wouldn't believe the kind of morning I've had, last-minute strategy session for the Adams account." Daniel caught how she put extra emphasis on the name Adams. Quite the emergency, it seemed, one that required full makeup and a new dress. For a fleeting second, Lauren's smile wavered. "A woman needs to look her best for work, you know," she said with a wave, casting a glance at his scuffed work boots and worn-out jeans. "Not everyone goes for the rugged construction worker aesthetic." Daniel set his mug down calmly. "These boots," he replied, "paid for those fancy shoes of yours, and for this house we're standing in." Lauren rolled her eyes, her phone buzzing right on cue. She started typing away, a smirk forming at the corner of her lips. "Some of us have moved on from measuring success by calluses and hard labor." Daniel watched as she practically floated up the stairs, already absorbed in the messages lighting up her screen. In all their 8 years together, he'd never seen her so energized by work before. Then again, her job hadn't included Michael Adams until just 3 months ago. The upcoming neighborhood barbecue at the Harris's place turned out to be more revealing than expected. Standing by the grill with Ryan Harris, Daniel noticed how Lauren had positioned herself across the yard, mingling with the younger wives. They were all huddled together, glued to their phones like a group of teens. "You hear about the new hotshot at Lauren's firm?" Ryan asked, flipping burgers like it was second nature. "Some guy named Michael, right?" "Adams," Daniel corrected, taking a slow swig of his beer. "Michael Adams. Supposedly, he's shaking up their whole marketing strategy." Just then, Megan Brooks, another neighbor, walked over with an empty plate. "Oh, you mean Mike," she slipped up, then quickly corrected herself. "Sorry, that's what some of the ladies at the country club called him. He's been making quite the appearance there lately, loves the attention." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about the country club we pay a membership for?" Megan suddenly looked down, seemingly fascinated by her empty plate. "Didn't Lauren mention? He's been her regular tennis partner these last few weeks. They usually play during those extended lunch breaks," she added, glancing over at Lauren, who was laughing a bit too loudly at something on her phone. "I thought you knew." "Extended lunch breaks?" Daniel repeated, his voice flat. "No, she didn't bring those up." Ryan tried steering the conversation elsewhere, but the damage was done. From across the yard, Daniel could see Lauren's phone buzzing again. She subtly turned her body, hiding the screen as she typed back quickly. Later that night, driving home, the silence in the car felt heavy. Eventually, Lauren broke it. "The Harris's parties used to be fun, didn't they? Now it's just the same old crowd, droning on about their dull lives. Kind of like Michael Adams." Daniel kept his gaze fixed on the road. "Your tennis buddy?" Lauren's laugh had an edge to it. "Oh, did the local gossip mill give you the scoop?" "Yes, Michael and I play tennis. At least he's good at it, unlike some people who think sweating over blueprints counts as exercise." "Interesting," Daniel remarked, not looking at her. You never mentioned those lunch breaks before. What's interesting, she snapped back, her tone dripping with scorn, is how you're acting like some jealous teenager. Michael is a colleague, an ambitious, successful one who actually knows how to enjoy life. Maybe you should take some notes. Pulling into their driveway, Daniel shut off the engine. The only notes I'm taking are on how fast you've forgotten who built everything you take for granted. Built? Lauren shot back with a sneer as she stepped out of the car. You pound nails and boss around other guys who pound nails. Michael? He creates. He's an innovator. And it seems he's convinced you that you're too good for all this. Daniel gestured toward their elegant home. Too good for the life we've built together. Lauren's smile twisted into something cruel. Maybe I am. She strutted into the house, leaving Daniel standing there in the driveway, every instinct honed from his military days screaming that something far worse was on the horizon. By the time their 8th anniversary rolled around on a crisp October morning, Daniel had already spent the early hours checking on 3 different job sites, making sure everything was in order before he headed out early. He had planned a surprise for Lauren, though it wasn't the romantic kind she might have been expecting. When Daniel pulled up to the house around 2 p.m., he noticed Lauren's car already parked in the driveway. Perfect timing. He grabbed his briefcase, not the usual beat-up leather one he carried every day, but a brand new case filled with very specific documents, and headed inside. Lauren was waiting for him in the living room, lounging on their sleek Italian leather sofa like a cat ready to pounce. A manila envelope lay on the coffee table right in front of her. You're back early, she purred, but the look in her eyes was anything but welcoming, more like a hunter sizing up its prey. It's our anniversary, Daniel replied, setting the briefcase down with care. Thought it was time we had a little chat. How sweet of you, Lauren's tone dripped with mock affection. She picked up the manila envelope, giving it a theatrical wave. I actually have a gift for you first. Daniel didn't reach for it. He just looked at her, unblinking. Divorce papers? He asked flatly. Her smile only widened as she added a twist to her proposal. See, Michael and I have been discussing this, she began, her voice laced with satisfaction. And we thought. Michael Adams, right? Daniel interrupted, his tone sharp. Yes, Michael, Lauren replied as she got to her feet, smoothing out her dress as though she were prepping for a performance. He's helped me realize what I've been missing out on, excitement, passion, a man who actually knows how to please a woman. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a stage whisper. And tonight, he's going to give both of us a little demonstration. Daniel felt a wave of cold fury wash over him, but he kept his expression unreadable. Go on, explain yourself, he said calmly. Oh, sweetheart, I've arranged something special, Lauren continued, her grin taking on a predatory edge. I've been seeing someone from work, and tonight he's here to show you what it's like to really satisfy me in bed. Daniel stood motionless, his Marine training kicking in as rage surged through him. The moment that idiot sets foot inside my house, he said quietly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge, I'll make sure he's a broken mess and then toss both of you out on the street for the whole neighborhood to witness. Lauren laughed, already tapping away on her phone. Too late, darling. I invited him over early, he's already here. As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Daniel didn't so much as blink. It felt oddly fitting that their 8-year marriage was ending with the sound of a doorbell. Lauren practically skipped to the door, flinging it open with a flourish to reveal Michael Adams, the man she'd thrown everything away for. He strutted in, all 6 feet 4 inches of him, dressed in an expensive suit with a perfect smile courtesy of top-tier cosmetic dentistry. He carried a bottle of champagne and wore an expression of smug charm. You must be the husband, Michael said, his voice smooth as he tried to maintain his confident swagger. Lauren's told me so much about you. Daniel's reaction was swift and precise. Without a word, he reached into his pocket and pressed a button on his key fob. All around the house, thick steel shutters descended over the windows with a mechanical hiss. The front and back doors locked shut, heavy bolts sliding into place with a series of final, echoing clicks. "What's going on?" Lauren demanded, her bravado fading as uncertainty crept into her voice. Daniel's smile was anything but friendly. "Just a bit of insurance," he said calmly, "to make sure there aren't any witnesses." Michael's smile faltered, though he quickly recovered, flashing his perfect teeth in what he probably thought was a winning grin. "Now, Daniel," he began, trying to sound reasonable, "can I call you Daniel? Let's all just take a breath. Lauren and I figured you might be open to a more progressive view of marriage." "Progressive?" Daniel's voice was icy enough to chill the room. "Is that what you call seducing someone else's wife and stealing their money?" Lauren's face drained of color. "What on earth are you talking about?" "Oh, don't worry. We'll get to that in a minute." Daniel picked up his briefcase, his movements slow and deliberate. "But first, let's have a look at your so-called gift. I've got a few surprises of my own." The sharp click of the briefcase lock's opening echoed loudly in the now eerily quiet room. With the steel shutters blocking out most of the sunlight, strange shadows danced across their stylish living room, transforming it into something more akin to an interrogation room. As Daniel glanced at Lauren and Michael, he couldn't help but think that the setting was quite appropriate. The real questioning was about to begin. "Sweetheart," Lauren began, her voice syrupy but with a slight quiver, "you're blowing this out of proportion." "Michael and I." "Michael and you," Daniel interrupted, his tone as sharp as a blade, "need to take a seat. We've got a lot to go over before those shutters go back up." Michael darted a glance toward the front door, clearly sizing up his odds of making a run for it. Daniel's smile widened, but there was something in it that made the taller man take a cautious step backward. "Sit down," Daniel ordered, his voice carrying the weight of 8 years of pent-up frustration mixed with the authority of a Marine drill sergeant. "Both of you, now." They obeyed. Outside, a neighbor strolled by with their dog, briefly pausing to note the odd sight of the security shutters closed in the middle of the day. But they kept walking. Everyone knew about the high-end security system Daniel installed after a break-in attempt last month. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Little did they realize that behind those steel-covered walls, a marriage of 8 years was about to implode in a way that would fuel gossip for years. Daniel Parker, former Marine and now a successful contractor, was about to remind everyone that dignity should never be mistaken for weakness. The real show was about to kick off. The silence in the room felt like a tightrope pulled to its breaking point. Lauren's once confident demeanor had cracked, though a flicker of defiance still lingered in her eyes. Michael's previously perfect posture had slumped, his expensive suit now appearing more like a costume than real clothing. The bottle of champagne hung limply from his hand, seemingly forgotten. Daniel moved deliberately, setting his briefcase down on the coffee table. The steel shutters had turned their bright, airy living room into a shadowy stage, an ideal setting for the scene he had meticulously prepared. "Before we get to your so-called special gift," Daniel said, his voice heavy with a calm certainty, "I've got a few gifts of my own to share." The briefcase lock snapped open with a crisp click. Inside, 3 neatly labeled manila folders sat waiting. Daniel picked up the first folder, savoring the moment as Lauren and Michael's eyes followed his every movement like prey watching a predator. "Funny thing about success," Daniel mused as he opened the first folder. "Everyone wants to claim it, but very few want to put in the work. Isn't that right, Michael?" Michael swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Listen, Daniel, whatever you think you know." "Show them," Daniel cut him off, flinging the contents of the folder across the coffee table. Photos scattered everywhere, dozens of them, each capturing Michael in compromising situations with various women, all of them wearing wedding rings, all of them from Lauren's office. Lauren snatched one of the photos, her voice wavering between fury and fear. "What is this? Have you been spying on him?" "Spying?" Daniel's laugh was cold and humorless. No, Lauren. I've been keeping an eye on you. All of this, he gestured to the photos, just came as a bonus. He turned to Michael. Care to tell her about Emily from accounting? Or perhaps Katie from HR? Both of them still think they're your one and only side piece. The tan on Michael's face seemed to drain away. Those were just business meetings, he stammered. In hotel rooms. Business meetings? Daniel raised an eyebrow, pulling out his phone and playing a video clip. You've got an interesting way of discussing quarterly reports, with your tongue down their throats. This is absurd. Lauren shot to her feet, her face flushed with indignation. You're just trying to. Sit down, Daniel's voice snapped like a whip. We're only getting started. He dropped the second folder onto the table with a thud, its contents spilling out, bank statements, loan agreements, and gambling receipts. The papers covered the polished surface like damning confetti. Your new beau has some pretty expensive hobbies, Lauren. Unfortunately, his paycheck can't quite keep up with his lifestyle. Daniel held up a particularly incriminating statement. 700 grand in gambling debts, Michael. Quite the deep hole you've dug for yourself. Michael's confident veneer began to crumble. Where did you get those? They're private. Private? Daniel's smile was razor-sharp. You mean like the private accounts Lauren has been dipping into at 2 a.m. to help cover your losses? Lauren went rigid. What on earth are you talking about? Daniel reached for the third folder, handling it like it contained the ace in a high-stakes poker game. You know the security company that installed our system at home? They also handle surveillance for your office. When you started working late nights, I asked them to send me the footage. Imagine my surprise when I saw you sneaking into the finance department in the middle of the night. You've been tailing me. Lauren's voice was shrill, her outrage sounding hollow. No, Daniel replied calmly. I've been protecting you. There's a difference. He spread the documents out for her to see. But it looks like the only real threat to you has been yourself. Care to explain these unauthorized transfers, or should we wait for the forensic accountants to take a look? Lauren's hands shook as she stared at the papers in front of her. Each sheet detailed the transfer of funds from company accounts to hidden offshore holdings. It was all laid bare, her embezzlement clear as day. How much has she funneled your way, Michael? Daniel asked with an almost casual air. 200 grand. Maybe 3. Must feel pretty good having a sugar mama who's willing to steal for your sake. Michael shot up from his seat, tugging at his jacket as if trying to regain some control. This is all just circumstantial. You've got no proof. Right then, Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen with an exaggerated show of interest. Perfect timing, he remarked. Michael, care to explain why your bookie just texted me, confirming receipt of those blackmail photos? Or should we hold off until Lauren's boss calls about the anonymous tip on the missing funds? The shift in Michael was instant. His towering 6 feet 4 inches frame seemed to deflate as reality crashed down on him. Gone was the image of the confident, successful businessman, in its place stood a desperate, exposed con artist. You're bluffing, Michael sputtered, but his eyes kept darting toward the steel-covered windows, clearly realizing the walls were closing in. Lauren's phone erupted in a flurry of notifications, the constant buzzing echoing in the tense room. Her face went pale as she scrolled through the messages, her hands trembling. You didn't, she breathed out. Oh, I absolutely did, Daniel leaned back, looking entirely at ease. By now, everyone at your office is aware. And the police? They're likely going through the evidence as we speak. Lauren lunged for her purse in a panic. I need to call my lawyer. Which one? Daniel's smirk deepened. The firm's attorney, who's currently discovering your embezzlement. Or our divorce lawyer, who just received undeniable proof you breached the prenup's infidelity clause. In a blind panic, Michael dashed for the door, forgetting it was securely locked. He pulled desperately at the handle, his cool demeanor shattered. "Let us out." Lauren's voice had lost its haughty edge, replaced with raw fear. "You can't do this, you can't hold us here." "Actually, I can," Daniel replied smoothly. "This falls under the home invasion protocol." He held up his phone. "As far as anyone outside knows, I'm handling intruders. In fact," he said while tapping a few buttons, "I just alerted the neighborhood watch. They're probably gathering out there as we speak." Lauren changed tactics, her voice dropping to a sultry whisper. "Daniel, sweetheart, we can still fix this. Whatever you want, we can make it work." "What I want," Daniel said, rising slowly from his seat, "is for both of you to fully grasp what you've thrown away." He turned to Michael first. "Those photos? They're already being shared with your other business meetings. And Lauren," he continued, fixing her with a cold stare, "your parents called. They're particularly curious about how you've been managing their investment in the firm." Michael slumped against the door, his bravado completely shattered. "My bookie, he's going to kill me." "That sounds like a personal issue," Daniel shrugged, checking his phone once more. "Oh, and the local news station seems very interested in a story about a 6 feet 4 inches scam artist and his partner in crime targeting wealthy women. Should make quite the headline." Tears began welling up in Lauren's eyes, streaking her mascara as they rolled down her cheeks. "Daniel, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Think about what this will do to my career. Like you thought about our marriage." Daniel's voice was as cold as ice. 8 years, Lauren. I gave you everything I had, and you repaid me with betrayal and public humiliation." He shifted his gaze to Michael, who had crumpled to the floor, a pitiful shell of the smooth operator he pretended to be. "And you," Daniel said, shaking his head, "the big shot, the slick player. Look at you now, you can't even stand up without that fake confidence you borrowed from others." The two of them exchanged desperate, panicked looks, their alliance falling apart under the crushing weight of the truth. They started speaking over each other, offering bribes, making hollow threats, and finally, resorting to pitiful pleas. Meanwhile, Daniel remained calm, making a series of calls, to Lauren's parents, to the victims Michael had swindled, and to the local media. With each call, their world closed in a bit tighter. "The Marines taught me a valuable lesson," Daniel said, watching them squirm, "that the best defense is a strong offense. You wanted to humiliate me, well, congratulations. The only ones you've managed to destroy are yourselves." From outside, muffled voices could be heard gathering, the neighborhood watch drawn in by the alert. Phones were undoubtedly out, recording the spectacle. Lauren buried her face in her hands, her designer dress crumpled, her makeup smeared beyond recognition. "My reputation," Michael groaned, his voice filled with despair. "Everything I've worked so hard to build." "Build?" Daniel chuckled, and this time the laugh was genuine. "You haven't built a thing. You're nothing more than a leech, sucking the success from others. And now, everyone can see it." Lauren made one last desperate attempt. "Daniel, think about what this will do to both of us, our friends, our social circle, our reputation." "There's no us anymore, Lauren," Daniel replied with a raised eyebrow. "You made sure of that the moment you turned our anniversary into a public spectacle to humiliate me." His phone buzzed once more, messages from neighbors asking if they should contact the police. It couldn't have been timed better. "You know what's ironic?" Daniel said as he calmly gathered the evidence back into his briefcase. "If you had just asked for a divorce, I would have given you a generous settlement. But you chose cruelty instead. You decided to make this into some sort of twisted game." He checked the security feed on his app. At least 20 neighbors had gathered outside, most with their phones out, ready to capture the scene. "And now," Daniel continued, his hand moving toward the lockdown controls, "your game is over." Lauren stumbled forward, reaching for him. "Wait, please, there must be something we can do." There's nothing left, Daniel cut her off, his voice cold. Only the consequences of your choices. Michael, your victims are already sharing their stories. Lauren, the firm's accountants are going through the records as we speak. Your parents? They're contacting their lawyers. And as for our neighbors, he gave a small smile, they're about to witness quite a performance. Michael had abandoned any semblance of dignity, slumped against the wall like a discarded mannequin. His designer suit was now wrinkled, and his perfectly styled hair had fallen apart, revealing the true, desperate man beneath. Lauren's tears had dried up, leaving her with a blank, stunned expression as the gravity of the situation set in. Her phone continued to buzz with messages she didn't dare open. Daniel stood tall in the center of the living room, surrounded by the ruins of his marriage, yet looking more powerful than ever. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't thrown a punch, he hadn't needed to. You wanted to show me how a real man handles things, he said softly. Well, thank you for giving me the perfect opportunity to demonstrate. His finger hovered over the button to release the lockdown. Outside, the crowd had grown, drawn in by the neighborhood watch alert about intruders being caught. Everything was ready. It was time to reveal to everyone who Lauren and Michael truly were. Sometimes, Daniel thought, the best revenge isn't about violence. It's giving people just enough rope to hang themselves and letting everyone watch them fall. With surgical precision, Daniel pressed the button to lift the lockdown. The steel shutters hummed as they rose, unveiling the scene to the gathered crowd outside. The fading evening light highlighted a sea of phones raised like torches, eager to capture what they believed was the aftermath of a break-in. Lauren's face twisted with horror as the reality of the situation hit her like a tidal wave. Through the now uncovered windows, she could see Emily from 3 houses down, her phone held high and recording. Ryan Harris stood there with his teenage sons, all filming the spectacle. Even Mrs. Henderson, the retired teacher who never ventured out after 5 p.m., was standing on her lawn, clutching her phone while wearing her gardening hat. What have you done? Lauren's voice cracked as she choked out the words. I gave you the audience you wanted, Daniel said as he swung open the front door. Though it might not be quite the show you were expecting. Michael made a frantic dash toward the back door, but Daniel's voice cut through the air like a knife. Don't bother. That exit's locked too. You've got 2 options, walk out the front door now or wait here for the police. I haven't actually called them yet, but I'm sure your bookie would love to know exactly where you are. The mere mention of his bookie drained the last bit of fight from Michael. His expensive suit now hung off him like a costume on a scarecrow, and sweat had turned his carefully styled hair into a matted mess. This wasn't supposed to happen, Lauren whispered, streaks of mascara tracing paths down her cheeks. You were supposed to. Supposed to what? Daniel's voice carried just loud enough for the nearest neighbors to overhear. Break down. Beg for mercy. Let you play your little humiliation game. The word humiliation rippled through the gathered crowd, their phones shifting to zoom in closer on the doorway where Lauren and Michael now stood, exposed and defeated. A voice called out from the back of the crowd, everything all right, Daniel? Just fine, Dave, Daniel replied calmly, his voice carrying over the murmurs. Just dealing with a couple of uninvited guests who decided to throw an unpleasant surprise for my anniversary. The mention of their anniversary sent another ripple of whispers through the gathering. Lauren tried to hide her face, but it was too late. The realization spread like wildfire, this wasn't just any man standing with Lauren Parker on her anniversary. The crowd knew exactly what they were witnessing. Michael cracked first. His tall frame seemed to shrink as he turned and bolted for the door, shoving his way through the onlookers. A slow clap started somewhere in the back, then another joined in, until the entire street was filled with the rhythmic sound of mocking applause. Michael Adams' desperate retreat now had a fitting soundtrack. Lauren was right behind him, her designer heels clacking frantically on the pavement as she fled. The clapping only got louder, mixed with the unmistakable sound of dozens of phones capturing every second of what would soon be the most shared video in the neighborhood. "Walk of shame," a teenager shouted, followed by a chorus of laughter and even more clapping. Daniel remained standing in his doorway, shoulders back, watching as his wife of 8 years ran down the street with her lover. He didn't crack a smile, he didn't need to. The scene was speaking louder than any words could. The fallout spread faster than anyone could have predicted. By the next morning, local news vans lined the street, eager for details about the 6 feet 4 inches con man and his partner in crime. Clips from Daniel's security footage, showing Lauren and Michael plotting the humiliating surprise, circulated in private neighborhood groups before exploding on social media. Lauren's firm wasted no time. Carol Spencer, the CEO, called an emergency board meeting that very morning. "The evidence is undeniable," she informed the executives. "Lauren Parker has been accessing company accounts after hours, siphoning money through a network of offshore accounts. Early estimates suggest losses exceeding $500,000. George Parker, Lauren's father and a major investor in the firm, sat there in shock, his face ashen as forensic accountants presented their findings. "My own daughter," he muttered, almost to himself, "using my investment to cover her lover's gambling debts." By noon, the firm had filed formal charges. As if on cue, more of Michael's victims came forward, sharing eerily similar stories. Emily from accounting recounted how he lured her in with promises of lucrative investment opportunities. Katie from HR admitted to taking out personal loans to help him through what he called temporary cash flow problems. The meticulous evidence Daniel had gathered provided prosecutors with a clear pattern. Michael Adams wasn't just a cheater, he was a manipulative predator targeting affluent, married women to bankroll his gambling addiction. Lauren's attempt to salvage her reputation only made things worse. In a last-ditch effort, she posted a message on social media, painting herself as the real victim. "Daniel Parker publicly humiliated me in front of the entire neighborhood," she wrote. "He's trying to destroy me because I found love with someone else." Daniel's response was direct and devastating. He released the footage from his security cameras, showing Lauren and Michael inside his house hours before he came home, laughing as they plotted how they'd force him to watch their anniversary surprise. Lauren's recorded voice, dripping with mockery, echoed in the video, "Let's see how the traditional man handles a little modern entertainment." The video went viral. Lauren quickly deleted her social media accounts, but the damage was already done. Even her own parents publicly distanced themselves. "We raised our daughter with better values than this," Helen Parker told reporters outside their country club. "The woman we saw in those videos isn't the daughter we know." 6 months later, Daniel stood in the kitchen of his new home, a space bigger and brighter than the old one. He sipped his coffee, watching the morning news. The headlines covered Lauren's sentencing, 3 years in prison for embezzlement, plus court orders to repay over $1 million once civil penalties were included. "Well, at least she's got some retail experience now," Hannah quipped, sliding a fresh cup of coffee across the counter to Daniel. Her smile was warm and understanding, devoid of the bitterness she had every right to feel. As a military widow who had lost her husband to friendly fire, Hannah knew firsthand the sting of both loyalty and betrayal. Daniel took the coffee, appreciating how seamlessly Hannah had become a part of his new, simpler life. They'd met at a veterans fundraiser 2 months after everything went down, and it was her grounded outlook and respect for traditional values that had drawn him in. "Did you see Michael made the news again?" Hannah asked, nodding toward the newspaper on the table. "Caught trying to pull the same scam in Cincinnati. But his bookie's goons got to him first." Daniel nodded. Michael Adams' escape attempt had ended predictably, found in a Cincinnati alley with shattered kneecaps and a warrant for his arrest after skipping bail. His polished, sophisticated image was now nothing more than a cautionary tale featured in corporate training about predatory dating schemes. The doorbell rang, signaling the start of their housewarming party. The neighborhood had insisted on hosting it, eager to turn Daniel's new home into a celebration of karma in action. Ryan Harris was the first to arrive, carrying a bottle of champagne, the same brand Michael had brought on that fateful night. "I figured you'd appreciate the irony," he said with a grin. More guests soon followed, neighbors who'd witnessed the spectacle, new friends who admired the way Daniel had handled things. Even a few of Michael's former victims were there, now clients of Parker Construction, as betrayal had turned into an unexpected boost for his business. To justice. Megan Brooks raised her glass in a toast. Her own divorce from a cheating husband had been finalized just a month earlier. And to Daniel, who showed us all how it's done. Daniel lifted his glass, but there was no malice in his smile. He hadn't sought revenge, he'd simply defended what was his, brought the truth to light, and moved forward without losing his integrity. The neighborhood didn't remember the scandal for its drama, they remembered the dignity with which Daniel had handled the whole mess. These days, Lauren was working a retail job at a mall a couple of towns away. Her once impressive designer wardrobe had been replaced by a standard polyester uniform. Her lawyer had dropped her case when she couldn't afford the fees, leaving her to fend off civil suits on her own. The ironclad prenup she'd once thought she could challenge stood firm, backed by Daniel's damning evidence of her infidelity and calculated cruelty. The tale became a legend in their social circle, recounted at dinner parties and neighborhood get-togethers, not for the revenge, but for the lesson it left behind about choices and consequences. "I heard Lauren tried to get her old job back," Katie from HR remarked during the party. Carol Spencer just laughed and sent her the security footage again. Daniel didn't need to brag, the truth had already done all the talking. His construction business was booming, now expanding into 3 new counties. And with Hannah by his side, he found a warmth and ease that had been missing for years, free from the manipulation and power plays that had characterized Lauren's final days. As the party began to wind down, Daniel stood out on the back deck of his new home, Hannah's hand resting comfortably in his. The cool night air was filled with the sounds of genuine laughter and friendly conversation, a stark contrast to the forced sophistication that Lauren and Michael had once tried to flaunt. "You know what the best part is?" Hannah said, watching the guests mingle below. "You didn't have to throw a single punch. You just let them destroy themselves." Daniel smiled, thinking back to the last message he'd left for Lauren, recorded on a security camera after her sentencing. She'd made one final attempt to blame him for her downfall, but he knew better. "They handed me all the rope I needed," Daniel said quietly, squeezing Hannah's hand. "All I had to do was let them tie the knot." Sometimes the best revenge isn't violence, Daniel had told Lauren in that final recording. It's letting people unravel their own lives while everyone watches. The camera captured the exact moment when the reality set in for her, all the polished sophistication, the ruthless games, and her attempts to assert control had crumbled, simply from having her true self exposed to the world. Daniel's new home now stood as a symbol of moving forward, a monument to healing rather than wallowing in bitterness. What was meant to be a scene of his humiliation had transformed into a celebration of justice, karma, and the strength of sticking to one's principles. Meanwhile, the grand dreams Lauren and Michael had of being a power couple had disintegrated, ending not in luxury but in separate prison cells, their glossy facades peeled away to reveal nothing but emptiness underneath. In contrast, Daniel's life had blossomed, full of genuine connections and accomplishments grounded in truth rather than deceit. The neighborhood never forgot the saga, but not for the reasons Lauren and Michael had hoped. Instead, they remembered how Daniel Parker had turned an attempted public disgrace into a public reckoning, all without stooping to their level. Victory, Daniel realized, often isn't about what you do to others but about allowing them to confront the consequences of their own choices. And for Daniel Parker, that was more than enough. 5 years later, a crisp autumn breeze carried the scent of grilled meat across the expansive backyard of Daniel and Hannah Parker's home. Their annual neighborhood barbecue had become a cherished tradition, marking both the arrival of fall and a different kind of anniversary, a quiet reminder of how justice can come wrapped in the most unexpected of packages. Now nearing 50 but aging gracefully, Daniel stood at his professional-grade grill, expertly flipping burgers. Nearby, his stepdaughter Olivia, now 12, busily arranged cornbread on a serving platter. The freshly updated Parker Construction logo gleamed on the backsplash of the outdoor kitchen, a proud emblem of the company's growth into luxury home development across 3 states. "Mail's here," Hannah called out, stepping onto the deck with a small stack of envelopes. "Looks like we've got another one from the correctional facility." Daniel didn't look up, keeping his focus on the sizzling meat. Lauren's quarterly letters had become as predictable as clockwork, and just as pointless. "Let me guess," he said dryly. "Same as the last?" Hannah nodded, setting the unopened envelope aside. "Return to sender," she said with a shrug. "By the way, Megan mentioned Lauren's parole hearing is coming up next month." The news traveled quickly among the gathering guests. Megan Brooks, now the HR director at Parker Construction, confirmed with a wry smile. "My cousin works in the prison system," she explained. Apparently, Lauren's been a model inmate, teaching marketing classes to the other prisoners. Still running her little schemes, though, only now it's cigarettes instead of embezzled funds. Ryan Harris joined in, balancing a casserole dish his wife had baked. "I heard she got herself into trouble recently, tried starting an MLM pyramid scheme inside the prison. They took away her privileges for 3 months." "Old habits die hard," Daniel commented, with a tone free of any lingering bitterness. He'd long since moved beyond anger, finding himself somewhere between mild amusement and detached curiosity when it came to his ex-wife's endless manipulations. As the party continued, more neighbors arrived, filling the backyard with laughter and conversation. Many were new faces, but enough familiar ones remained, people who still remembered that unforgettable night when Daniel's steel shutters and a phone full of evidence had delivered a swift and poetic justice. Carol Spencer, Lauren's former CEO and now a close friend and major client of Parker Construction, arrived with her husband. "Just came from a board meeting," Carol said as she accepted a drink. "You won't believe who applied for a marketing job through one of our subsidiaries." "Please tell me it wasn't Lauren," Hannah said, her eyes widening with feigned shock, though her smile suggested she wasn't surprised at all. Carol chuckled. "Yep, she did. Through a staffing agency, using her maiden name," she shook her head in disbelief. 5 years later, and she still doesn't get how background checks work, or Google, for that matter. The conversation shifted to Michael Adams, whose life had taken a darker turn since his arrest in Cincinnati 5 years earlier. Incredibly, he had tried running his con artist schemes from behind bars, targeting wealthy inmates' wives during visitation. It ended as badly as one might expect. "He thought he could charm his way into their pockets even from a cell," Megan explained, rolling her eyes. "But his last attempt left him with a few missing teeth. Turns out, you can't hustle everyone." The group laughed, but it was more than just the humor of the situation. It was a shared acknowledgement of how far they'd all come, and how right the outcome had been. As the party wound down, Daniel found himself standing on the deck, taking in the scene. Hannah stood beside him, her hand resting comfortably in his. The cool night air was filled with genuine laughter and the sounds of friendship, a stark contrast to the forced, superficial charm Lauren and Michael had once tried to project. "You know what I love most about all this?" Hannah said, watching their guests mingle below. "You never had to raise your voice or throw a single punch. You just let them unravel on their own." Daniel smiled, thinking back to his final message for Lauren, captured on a security camera just before her sentencing. She had tried one last time to pin the blame on him for her downfall. "All I did," Daniel replied, squeezing Hannah's hand, "was give them the rope they needed. They tied the knots themselves." "Last I heard," Ryan leaned in, lowering his voice even though they were outside, "he messed with the wrong inmate's wife. Ended up getting his face rearranged. They had to move him to maximum security after that. Not looking so handsome anymore, from what I gather. Being 6'4" doesn't count for much when you're stuck with actual criminals," Megan chimed in. My cousin says he spends most of his time in protective custody now. Still owes a fortune to his bookies. Daniel listened without comment, focused on flipping burgers at the grill. He had heard through his business connections that Michael had tried reaching out to some of his old victims, offering them a chance to invest in his prison schemes. Every letter had been sent back unopened. His targets were far more cautious now. Olivia, who was wise beyond her years, glanced up from arranging the cornbread. "Dad, is it true you never even hit them? My friend's mom says you're her hero because you showed her how to handle her divorce without getting angry." Daniel exchanged a warm look with Hannah. They'd been married for 3 years now, blending their families with the same care Daniel brought to his construction projects, one step at a time, laying strong foundations. "Violence rarely offers a lasting solution," he told Olivia gently. "Sometimes the best response to people who want to hurt you is to step aside and let them face the consequences of their own actions." The gathering had grown so large that it spilled out onto the front lawn. New neighbors mingled with old friends, swapping stories and making connections. Daniel's annual barbecue had become a staple event in the neighborhood, known not just for the food but for the networking opportunities it provided. Many of Michael's former victims had found new success after the scandal, taking control of their finances and their futures. Katie from HR, who'd been swindled out of nearly $50,000, now ran her own financial literacy program for women. She credited her comeback to the meticulous way Daniel had exposed Michael's schemes. "Public humiliation can be a powerful teacher," she explained to a group of newcomers. "I thought I'd never recover from the shame when the truth came out. But instead, I realized I wasn't alone. We all ended up healing together." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, someone pulled out a stack of old news clippings. Even years later, the story still fascinated people, especially those who had only heard about it secondhand. The headlines told the whole tale: high society scandal, socialite and con man get their due, builder uncovers corporate embezzlement, local man outsmarts cheating wife's plot. Lauren's parents, who had relocated to Florida after the scandal broke, continued to send Daniel Christmas cards each year. They had even rewritten their will to include him instead of their daughter. Quietly, Daniel had made arrangements for any inheritance to be redirected to Olivia's college fund. In his view, some forms of justice are best passed down to the next generation. As the darkness settled in, the party moved indoors, filling the great room that Daniel had designed himself. The new house, 3 times the size of his old one, stood as a symbol of moving forward and not getting stuck in the past. Every detail, from the state-of-the-art security system to the open, welcoming layout, reflected hard-earned lessons and the wisdom that came from surviving betrayal. Hannah gathered everyone together for the annual group photo, a tradition they'd come to cherish. As the phones were lifted and the smiles flashed, Daniel couldn't help but reflect on how technology, once meant to be a weapon for his humiliation, had instead chronicled his comeback story. "Do you ever read her letters?" Olivia asked later as she helped with the cleanup. The unopened prison envelope sat on the kitchen counter, Lauren's neat handwriting visible beneath the smudged security screening marks. "No point," Daniel said simply. "The past belongs in the past. We're focused on building what's ahead." The latest updates about Lauren painted a familiar picture. Her attempts for early release had been denied, her manipulative behavior clearly noted by the prison psychiatrists. She had even penned a blog post claiming to be a victim of betrayal, conveniently flipping the narrative. But the internet has a long memory. Readers quickly flooded the comments with links to the original security footage, shattering her revisionist story. Michael's story, on the other hand, had become a staple for true crime podcasts, dissected by experts in fraud and psychology. His meteoric rise and subsequent crash now served as a cautionary case study in corporate security seminars. The once charming con man now walked with a noticeable limp, his once handsome features marred by the rough justice of prison life. His fraudulent schemes had earned him a longer sentence, with fresh charges still pending in several states. The neighborhood had undergone a transformation as well. Property values surged, drawn by the reputation of resilience and integrity that Daniel's story brought. The same street where Lauren and Michael had made their infamous walk of shame was now the site of block parties and charity events. Megan Brooks had gotten married last spring. Daniel and Hannah attended, noting how the ceremony was a celebration of loyalty and genuine partnership, rather than superficial romance. As the last of their guests departed, Daniel and Hannah stood together on their back deck, watching the stars blink into view. Inside, Olivia had drifted off to sleep on the sofa, safe and content in the warmth of their blended family. On the counter, Lauren's letter remained unopened, her meticulous handwriting a stark contrast to the chaotic life she now led. Same return address, same pleas to explain everything, same requests for money, Hannah noted quietly, her voice filled with a mixture of pity and disbelief. Daniel wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "Some folks never learn," he said with a wry smile. "And that's their real prison, far worse than any cell." Like all the others before it, the letter would be returned unopened. Lauren's attempts to rewrite the narrative had crumbled under the unyielding light of the truth captured on video. The sophisticated act she once relied on had vanished, replaced by the harsh reality of prison-issued shoes and institutional life. As for Michael, his time behind bars served as a harsh reminder that charm and manipulation only deflect karma for so long. The night air carried the fading laughter of their guests, a sweet reminder that life continued on, moving forward with a purpose. Daniel had built something real, a solid marriage, a thriving business, and a legacy rooted in honesty and integrity. No letter penned from behind bars could ever touch the foundation he had laid. "You know what still amazes me?" Hannah mused, leaning into his side. "You never raised your voice, never threw a punch. You just let them reveal themselves for who they really were." Daniel thought back to the security footage that still made the rounds online from time to time, showing Lauren and Michael gleefully plotting their little game. Their polished masks had slipped, exposing the hollow, spiteful people underneath. Sometimes, Daniel repeated his now familiar mantra, "The best revenge isn't violence. It's stepping back and letting people destroy themselves while everyone watches." With that, they closed the door on another memorable evening, ready to step into the future they'd built together, solid, honest, and true. For Daniel Parker, that was satisfaction enough.